Here. Hello, welcome. I'm Rebecca Kane, saying hello to lots of you. So happy you could come today. I'm going to pass over to Scarlett in a moment to do a land acknowledgement. I just wanted to let everybody know we're streaming live in 360 to folks who can't be here in person. They'll be able to kind of contribute by live chat if they like. I think that's probably more likely for the concert tonight. I'm not sure if anyone's going to make it for the workshop as well, but I'll let you know if anybody is watching as well. So just so you know, we're streaming interactively as part of the multiPLAY project. And multiPLAY is a project about improvisation, about community connection, and about digital play. And so we've been doing events for a couple of years, and we're really, really happy to have Helen Pridmore and her collaborator Altman and Ernie Dulanowsky from a wonderful Saskatchewan organization called Teletype here with us for today and for the concert this evening. And welcome to those of you who come via silence or via being interested in hearing about it. Some of you through the improvisation project as partners on this as well. So really happy you could all be here. And welcome, and I'll pass over to Scarlett, who can tell us a bit more about where we are. Thanks, Scarlett.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Scarlett Richitsky. I'm the Executive Director here at Silence. And I would obviously like to take a moment to just acknowledge that the lands we're gathering on today are stolen lands, and they are the ancestral lands of the Adelondaron and Neutral peoples, that's the territory and treaty lands of the Synthesizers of the Credit First Nation. And when we acknowledge this, I always like to encourage folks to look into what lands they live, work, and play on, as well as different ways that you can support the Indigenous by self-determination, as well as other Indigenous issues like Indigenous land defense, and other things, especially as we come up to a provincial election. It's always good to make sure that you're keeping your lawmakers accountable and doing whatever you can to support Indigenous peoples of Canada at this time and always, and acknowledge the ways that you are complicit in ongoing colonization and violence against Indigenous people and Indigenous land, and ways that you can do better and learn about how to support those kinds of things. So thank you for joining us, and I hope that moving forward, you'll all join me in doing that research as we continue to learn and learn. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ernie Dulanowsky. You all know who you are. I'm part of Altman, and even before that, I had an interest in making sounds with electronic things, and I've done so for a long enough time now. And that's the various things that I've been using to do that have evolved over the many years. And presently, this is the current iteration of stuff that I use, in particular when I perform, which hasn't been very frequent lately, of course, but this is like the second time I've performed in a couple of months. Third time, which is kind of special in this day and age. And I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the things that I've been using here to do what I do. And looking at this stuff when I was thinking about this, it seemed that a lot of these things kind of have an identity crisis. Like I'm looking at a few of the things here, and there's only it's sort of a split of things that have a dedicated purpose and things that can need to be told what to do. They're essentially things that need to be programmed. I'll just start off with this thing here. You may, or if you follow electronic music discussions on various forums and whatnot, you've heard of a company called Mono from New York. They make a beautiful grid controller, and they make this lovely little sound computer called Norns. That's $800 if you buy the lovely one. It's a brilliant aluminum case. It's nicely machined. It's got a built-in battery. It's gorgeous. But this is the DIY version. So it's they sold you what is essentially known as a half in Raspberry Pi parlance. It's a board that sits on top of a Raspberry Pi, so it's got audio in and out, a display, and a couple of encoders and a couple of buttons. And you download software image from Mono, and bam, you've got a Norns. And it's a lovely little computer. It's Linux way underneath, but it all of the heavy lifting for doing sound processing, whether it's sound generation or sound processing, is done with Super Collider. So people can, and so if you're versed in that, you can start doing things. Programming your own sketches and scenes on this thing. And a lot of people have done so. And even further, to kind of insulate you from Super Collider, if that's really not your thing, the Super Collider engines within that are programmed with another language called Lua, which is, I guess, is really easy to pick up, but I haven't yet. And you can kind of make a lot of different things, process sounds, make sounds. On the Mono Lines forum, there's a lot of people that are really, really good at programming some of these things. There's one fellow that identified himself as Infinite Digits. He's made some of the most wonderful sketches to use on this thing. And it was in September, he did a couple of workshops that ended up on the British Music Hackspace site about how to basically get into programming Super Collider to use in Norn, and it was just quite revelatory. So the other mono-related thing that can be programmed here, if you want to at turns come up and have a look, please do at whatever point you feel comfortable doing so. The other programmable thing from the mono ecosystem that I have is a thing called a Teletype. Now, it's a device that its main function is to generate things to control other things in a modular synthesizer system. It accepts controls triggers and one control voltage and outputs voltages and triggers of its own. And it's programmed with a very specialized language that they've developed. And one programs scripts that can only contain 6 lines, and you can program 8 scripts, actually 10. There's a special metronome one and an initialization one, so that's 10. And you do things like you program sequencers, you program the thing that I'm going to be using today, programmed by a fellow called Sample and Play. So I'll be inputting notes from another device here, and it essentially records the notes and then plays back, records 16 of them, plays back the last 8 in a different order, and kind of carries on like that. Then another, I guess, mono-related thing that's tiny and I almost missed it, the thing called Crow. And it's a little, again, it can generate or process just simply control signals for the most part. Although I think somebody did actually take it upon himself to make it a little synthesizer as well. And you can throw control voltages at it, triggers, and it will modify those as required or generate its own, by virtue of being programmed in a certain way. Now, Teletype and Crow and another mono module that I have called an Ansible and a few other things in the modular synthesizer world speak this other internal language called I2C. It's not really a language, it's a protocol that these devices can speak to each other on. And it allows for different control signals to be passed between devices. But some things have to be a master, like the Teletype. And some things, like this other large module here, have to be a follower. This guy is the ER301. It's a sound computer from Orthogonal Devices. It's a fellow who lives in Japan. I don't think he's Japanese. His name is Brian. It's essentially a modular synthesizer module. You connect things called units into chains that can create a sound or process a sound. And I've got a bit of both of that happening here, hence some of the thoughts I had about split personality. I've got part of it being a synthesizer essentially, and part of it being a looper. And so that's kind of the versatility of it and kind of the split personality part of it. And you can see a bunch of patch cables here. If I was really savvy and had done my homework, I could probably eliminate a bunch of these patch cords, because most of the interplay between these two is done with this. And if I use the I2C thing that I was talking about previously, that would all be happening with a little ribbon cable that's going underneath this stuff.
But secretly, you love all those wires.
Secretly, I do love all those wires. Like, I haven't gone like crazy like some people. There's, you can get ones that have lights on them. You can get ones that glow in the dark. I don't have any of those.
Yes.
Yeah. So these are all like those are the things with split personalities for the most part. One other module I have here that kind of knows what it's supposed to do is called Pachinko. It's actually a variant of a module made by a company, I think it's French, Mutable Instruments. It's called Marbles, and it's a module that generates random control signals. Just to add a bit of variation to something that's happening to make it a bit less stiff. Pachinko is a variation because the original one fits in a particular space, and this is a smaller version, just to take up less space in a tiny little case like this. And another variation for Mutable Instruments is this little guy up here called Flip. The Mutable Instruments one is called Branches, and it fits in the normal module space, but there's another company called After Later Audio made this one that's in this other little format here. And so it's kind of cute and fits nicely up there. One other fun thing that I've really been enjoying lately is this guy, Plinky.
I love all the names.
I know, right? Plinky was developed by this fellow, I think he's in the UK. And it's a lovely little synthesizer that's played by touching the surface here. So there's like 8 rows, and it's almost like strings, if you will. And they're tuned at certain intervals. And it's got a very, very rich synthesizer voice built into it. Its default sound is a thing known in the synthesizer world as a super saw, which is like a stacked 4 sawtooth voice that's really kind of rich and full and bright. And but the wave shapes are kind of continuously variable. If you go from 0 is the default, and if you go up, it goes through a wavetable, a series of different waveforms that have been placed in memory that you can just dial in and select a different sound, from sine waves up to something a bit more harsh. And then if you go negative, he's taken into account that people also like square waves when they talk about synthesizers, and it kind of go through a whole pulse width modulation thing on the negative side from a square wave to narrow and wide pulses. Instead of a normal filter that a synthesizer has, he chose to use a low-pass gate. If you've listened to people talk about synthesizers, you may have heard this little kind of discussion about East Coast versus West Coast synthesizers.
That was hip-hop.
What was that?
He said he thought it was hip-hop.
Oh. Well, there is that, but so early on in the days of developing synthesizers, Robert Moog on the East Coast developed synthesizers a particular way. He used waveforms that were rich in harmonics, sawtooth, square, stuff like that, and subtracted harmonics using a filter. And most famously for him, decided that a keyboard, a normal kind of a black and white keyboard, was the best way to control it. On the West Coast, Don Buchla was working with people at the Tape Music Center, and these people said, we don't necessarily care about those kind of notes and things like that. We care about making very interesting sounds and controlling them in interesting ways. So he didn't bother with a black and white keyboard. He had a touch controller. He had things called complex oscillators, which were a pair of sine wave oscillators, one modulating the frequency of the other and generating really complex sounds by doing that. And the other kind of tone shaping component that he came up with was a low pass gate, a combination of a filter and a voltage controlled amp, which is meant to provide a more natural kind of dynamic quality to a sound. So that's what this fellow has done here, and it's nice. And I kind of enjoy the sound of it, and I like the way it does its thing. It's got a built-in delay. It's got a built-in reverb. And if that wasn't enough, it also can play samples back. You can put 8 samples into it. You actually have to. They don't have a way yet to input samples via the USB port. So you actually have to sample them through the audio input jack. And I think they go for like 64 seconds is the maximum. And once you put a sound in, it automatically slices it into 8 bits, which can be mapped on the 8 kind of strips. And playing the samples back, you can either kind of play each of those slices, if you will, which you can, and the slice location you can edit, so you can put that in a different place if you didn't like where it did it on its own. Or you can play it kind of chromatically, so it maps the one sample across all of this stuff, and you can play it like a more traditional sampler would play it. It's got a sequencer in it, which you input manually and whatnot. It's got an arpeggiator, which is kind of fun to play with because it makes pretty sounds. And control-wise, it's got like 4 low-frequency oscillators that have a ridiculously variable waveform, including some random stuff and some additional envelopes. And it has a skew thing that you can move things around with. 2 of them you can bring up to these knobs to control mouse. And 2 of them, and I haven't messed with this too much yet, have things that can be controlled with an accelerometer that's apparently built into this thing. It's kind of cute like that. And if you look at the front, and obviously note this stuff here as well, inputs and outputs that are compatible with all of the Eurorack modular stuff. And the notes that I'm putting into that Teletype sketch are coming from this guy. Another thing that is handy to have is a controller. This one, again, I learned about this one from the Lines forum. It's called the 16N. You can build it on your own if you want to source out all the parts. I bought one that was built. It outputs MIDI via USB. It has control voltage outputs from each of the 16 controllers here for the modular people. And it also has an 1/8" MIDI jack, because a lot of things have that now. And it also talks the aforementioned I2C. So you can, have one cable to do control about 16 things, which I've done with the ER301 as well. A mixer. This is another kind of a multiple personality thing. The Keith McMillan K-Mix. It's very pretty looking, to be sure. It can be a mixer with 8 ins and 8 outs. It has, and those 8 outs can be used to do a multi-channel mix. You can do a 4-channel, like a 5.1 kind of a thing, or an 8-channel mix. These little circular things become kind of multi-channel pan pots for each of the channels. I'm just doing it in stereo today. Built in, look, it's got via software, compressor, limiter, EQ for each channel, and it's also an audio interface. And if you push the right buttons, it can be a MIDI controller too. So it's kind of good like that. Now, what's the computer doing here if I've got all this stuff? I brought it to record my set this evening. So, and if anybody cares, I use the digital audio workstation Reaper. I've recently learned that I don't need to use most of the stuff that Ableton Live has. They don't work in that way. I just need to record something and be able to deal with it really quickly, and Reaper does all that and more. So, and I think that's about all I have to talk about today. Sorry, that's a little short, I know, but I guess I can entertain questions.
Can we hear it?
Oh, sure.
There's a lot of telling us.
Yeah, let us hear something.
Okay, so this is just blinking right now. It's just playing some arpeggiated notes right now.
Sample?
No, this is synthesized right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, those are all descriptors of the functions. So when you want to do something on here, there's these two buttons here, upper and lower. And you'll see there's like a little upper and lower label. So if I do this and push that one, I'm changing the wave shape. So if I do this one, then that adds like white noise. Yeah, just with those two buttons there. Yeah, so it's like pretty much everything has two functions to it. There's a special role for the sampler of things that are allowed, like okay, so here's now it's playing a sample, and it's really just struggle where it is kind of on the road. And next is because it has some granular to it. So now you can adjust grain size and playback speed, or it has some time stretching that it can do because it's doing granular stuff. So it's not super full feature, but it can do a few different things for sample sounds. And then okay, so that's Plinky. And this is half of the real one. I was talking about it being a synthesizer or a sampler. This set of things is being a synthesizer right now. And it's being I've kind of got set up the kind of a complex oscillator as I was talking about. So I've got a sine wave oscillator, and I've got mixing two of them, but the second one is also modulating the frequency of the first one. And then it's going into a filter, which is being controlled by that little generator, and then into a little delay, and then the limiter there to keep things playing as well. And now this side, I'm playing a sample off of this little SD card here, and it's going into a looper. When you're processing live sound, you have to do a weird thing where you assign something with a buffer to hold the sound to be actually processing the thing. So this looper is kind of my original buffer, and then it's going into this device called a clock strip, which does some granular trickery. And then into a filter and into a delay because that's how I like to roll. And then this guy, Otis. This is the script is called Otis, and it's two loopers that are kind of they're sort of in sync with themselves and not really. You can adjust the speed of them separately, and you can adjust how long the loops are. I've got there's like filters that aren't exposed on this screen. That's why I've got the controller going. I've got like a 5 different parameters, like filters and then volume and speed that I can kind of mess with.
Are they all digital?
Yeah.
The oscillators? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
They're very nice models of analog sounds and stuff like that. But yeah, they're digital. Yeah, there's one thing that I've had to labor with this thing. Whether it's this is one of the first iterations of this DIY Norge Shield, as they call it, and I think it you can hear this. You hear that kind of that high hum. It's picking up a bit of whatever, from the Raspberry Pi and whatnot. And I've kind of come to embrace that. It kind of reminds me of like guitar amp noise, the 21st century version of it. It's more prevalent when there's really nothing going on, of course, but. This masks well when there's a signal happening, but sometimes when you're processing something quiet with this, it talking about how this thing can not only process sound, but it can make its own sound. One of the first scenes that you come up with is a program called Awake. To show you that it's awake. Synthesizer built into it, obviously. And the first screen it shows is two sequences. One is the notes that it's playing, and the second is a sequence that talks about the transposition of the notes that are being played. And the sequencer in this particular version, the synthesizer is modeled after a West Coast synthesizer. It's got the low-pass gate and a couple of an FM oscillators that you can mess with. If I would have been smart, I would have brought my grid along because you can program the sequences really great. Oh!
I was just wondering, like, in terms of, like, performing it, what's the I guess the learning curve and or the relationship between understanding the mechanisms and then using them or applying them as an instrument or...
Oh, yeah.
Like
Well,
what's that connection?
Like with this particular device, or just everything in?
Well, I mean, you could narrow.
Well,
it
let's talk about this. There's, there's a lot of people that have taken up, like based on the activity on that Lines forum. There's a lot of people have taken up building these because it's a relatively cheap way to get something that can do a lot of stuff, right? Because like what a Raspberry Pi is like what, $40. The Norge Shield itself is like, I think it's a couple of $100 now, and they're getting kind of hard to get because of chip shortages right now. But like, now you don't have to sort, I had to source my own case. They sell you a case and the shield and everything. So a lot of people are doing that. You don't necessarily need the fancy mono controllers because they're not cheap either. But people have figured out how to use Novation launch pads with them. And so, this is a kind of a thing that, if you have like the buttons to push, you don't even need the buttons. You can, if you want to push these little guys here and use the encoders, you can program stuff like that. And it's a kind of a nice and easy way to get some instant gratification at making some nice sounds and nice melodies. There's another really cute,
do people just buy stuff and play it, or do you think they always are getting to the making of it?
I think there's a bit of both.
Yeah.
I think there's a bit of both. Like the fellow that has the little company that made this case, he presently has also on his website a little MIDI sequencer that looks like a really sawed-off typewriter keyboard with a tiny display on it that looks kind of cool.
So everybody's into the making.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
They don't just become a player. You are a maker as well.
So here's one called O-O-O. And this is by that fellow Infinite Digits. There's a little grid on here, and one connects dots on the grid. So much with just this. There's a couple of people that from the Lines forum. I seem to be kind of fixated on people. Am I stalking them? I don't know. But there's one person that's known as Helen G. She has a few releases on Bandcamp, and all she's used is one of these. I think she also has one where she has a Plinky processed through a Norns. And in fact, I have a radio program on community radio back in Regina, and for our fundraising drive, my special program was me performing, and that's what I used, was Plinky processed with the Norn Shield. And people had to tolerate that on air for an hour.
When you're playing this stuff, do you like how much it is the resulting sound part of your intention, or are you just like you were just talking about? Oh, I just threw together these 3 or 4 layers.
Well, like with that on that particular program, that's just kind of the way it's set up.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, when I did the performance on radio, I wanted to do something that's sort of sequenced with this, as well as using that Awake program on here.
Mm-hmm.
So I just kind of had them interplaying with each other, and then that was one half hour. The second half hour, again, this was the main voice being processed by a granular processing program in this.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that if I adjusted the grain sizes in a particular way, it could be more of a rhythmic pulse, almost like a weird mutated tremolo of some sort, and I used that to kind of make a rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
Can I go away that?
Yes, please.
Like this still looks. You're making it sound like this is kind of easy. It's a little thing, but you still have things connected to other things.
Yeah.
So many things.
If I come or I see this on YouTube or something, I think, well, that's really cool, and I get these units, but I don't even know how to connect it to a sound system. So how do I get sound out of this? And then, how am I? You've got a whole bunch of things that you can play with, but I'm presuming I need, as a player, I need to understand how things are going in and out and how how one can control another, which you're saying, but you're kind of you're skipping over, how the hell do I understand what's going on here?
The mono community, the people that make this, have really, really, really good documentation.
Well, that's helpful.
Really good documentation.
Not often helpful.
The fellow that developed this made an hour-long video about explaining what all of the stuff on the front works and how to hook things up. And then similarly, there's a Discord server. If you're into following one of those for Plinky that's really active, it's maybe a little hard to find good info on a Discord server, but if you want to do a search, you probably can. And there's communities around this stuff, and people. The manufacturer of the ER301 orthogonal devices, they have a forum as well. They have a wiki site built just for the ER301. Look, when I look on the forum, you can see he also makes a sequencer that's in 2 sections, and you can see the discussion topics, the numbers of for the ER101 and the 102, which are those sequencer devices. There's a couple of hundred, and for the ER301, there's 1,500. There's a lot of discussion going on about this, and there's a lot of he's constantly developing new firmware and fixing things up. When I got this, it was at version 4 of its software, and when you wanted to, and people in the community developed different units to do different sound things, like whether it's a drum synthesizer or an echo device or whatever, and you'd have to kind of download it, take this SD card out, which you still have to do anyway, load it onto the SD card in a particular folder in the right spot so that you can access it to put in the chain. Now, what they've done is they've developed package management. So you would download a package from a new website that they've developed, the ER301 Hub, put it on the card in the packages folder, go into the admin section on this device, you flip a switch and go into admin, go to packages, click on the package, install, and everything's in the right place.
Am I right that you can still get a modular synth kit and start
You can get
kit that
kits.
someone else has put together that goes, and then you could get brave and start buying.
No, you kind of have to.
You still have to know.
You have to you can buy kits of individual modules.
Right.
And from a few manufacturers you can buy systems.
Yeah.
So, but what's the fun in that?
What's the fun?
Okay, no, one of the more famous ones, Make Noise Music in North Carolina, Asheville. They have a thing called the shared system. They have a few other ones. They have a music concrete system because they have a thing that records things similar, in a fashion similar to tape, and you can do splicing and whatnot. It's kind of fun. Apparently, I don't have one.
In your setup, are there others who would have something that's pretty much the same?
Funny you should say that. The reason I got the ER301 was I saw a video from a fellow in China, and he had a system similar to this. He had the ER301. He had two other kind of control modules and a signal processor and an output module, and it made the most gorgeous sounds. He was playing some little, and he's doing sort of the same thing. He's playing some field recordings through it, and then some little synthesized blips being sequenced by some of the control things. It just sounded so gorgeous, and I fell in love with it. I gotta get one of them. So I got on the list for the ER301 because this fellow doesn't make them. There's one guy that makes them, and I don't know whether he outsources the assembly of them or whatever, but there's one guy, and you have to wait a long time to get one. But I did, and I've been rewarded. Same with Plinky. You have to get on a mailing list to get these.
I'm sure that's part of the fun.
And actually, speaking of building, I did have to assemble. There was some assembly required. I didn't have to solder I had to solder the jacks onto a board, as well as the pots, the display, and the encoder. There's like two boards. There's the board with all of the smarts on it, and then the top layer where the controls are is another board. In the first iteration of this kit, you had to solder all of those LEDs in. You had to, and they're surface mount LEDs, so like they're ridiculously tiny, right? In the second iteration that I bought, because I didn't find out about it until then, they were all soldered on.
We all have soldering irons.
And one thing that I didn't bring with me because I don't have room for it and I don't have the right thing to put it in is they made an expander for this. And it's another little module that can sit beside it or on top depending on how you build things. And it brings out the 4 low frequency control oscillators that I was mentioning that this thing had to separate jacks so I could output them to things here. As well as it had MIDI in and out, because this thing can speak MIDI as well. This can be a MIDI controller, or it can be like an 8-voice synth module, if you so choose. So it's kind of handy like that too.
So using the kind of, I don't know if this is even a question that would make sense in this space, but using the technology that's already been created here, could you assemble it a different way and have it work similarly? For example, if you wanted these touch things that are already part of this program, could you like attach it to very different?
Absolutely, yeah. As a controller for a modular synth, it's kind of limited because it only has like a single pitch output. Like this can play 8 synthesizer voices internally, but it only has one pitch output. So I could control one synthesizer voice if I built it up like that and do that kind of thing.
Like a giant puzzle.
It is like a giant puzzle.
In a million different pieces.
I know you. Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I know you explained it in terms that I honestly didn't understand, but the programming of the voices, like what is entailed in the programming of the voices?
Well,
who's doing that work and how does that actually be?
I'm kind of talking about what's kind of a standard, almost canonical synthesizer voice, right? An oscillator, a tone source, or oscillators, depending on how much money you want to spend or how a particular synthesizer is built. That typically, and if you have more than one, you mix them, goes into a filter. Typically, in most synthesizers, like in this, a low pass filter, so it, cuts off highs. And can blunt the sound a little bit, or if there's a resonance control that can make a peak happen that kind of makes a bit of sharpness and squonkiness go on. that usually goes into a voltage-controlled amplifier to control loudness. And to dynamically control the filter and the voltage-controlled amp, there's an envelope generator. And the envelope generator generates a control signal that varies over time, and it has typical parameters of attack, like how fast the sound builds up, like really quickly like a plucked sound, or slowly like a woodwind or something like that, and then a bit of decay, and then a sustain level, and then a release after you let the key go. And so there can be one or two of those controlling the voltage-controlled amp and the filter. And that's played by the keyboard or a sequencer or whatever.
And so it's through like some kind of a keyboard sequencer where you're also like a pitch.
Yeah, the keyboard determines the pitch. I want to go get a thing off the rack here.
I was a little worried about how many bags he would read on the plane.
I don't know. This was left here, but I noticed it, and I'm going to bring it out and show it off. So this is a very popular thing right now. This is a Midi controller. It's also a sequencer. You can play notes on here, and it will record them. And there they are. There's control voltage output. So this could directly control some of this stuff here. Or if all you had was MIDI instruments, it can do that with the MIDI ports there.
But it's more fun to turn the knobs in.
It's more fun to
I'm familiar with some of these modules and not so much with others, but the ones that I recognize, which is like a majority, I think, a lot of them seem to be from people who are really invested in like open design, open source software and hardware. Is that a conscious decision?
That I appreciate that. If I felt more like building some of these things, and I don't like sourcing parts, because that can be kind of a pain. I like buying kits and building like that. But yeah, the Teletype, if you so choose, you could build one of those on your own. They publish the plans. Anything by Mutable Instruments, like the older stuff, is open source. Like that's why this one exists. Like the original marbles, if you know like the nomenclature is like 18 HP wide. This one's 12. And there's another maker that made one that's only 10. Because he knows that people are going to be buying these little pallet cases and want to cram it full of stuff. Well, yeah, and the Norns too. Like, people have been building their shields and not buying the pre-built one from Mono too. So
for sure, but so in case of the question of like a touch controller, there are like a half dozen of those on the market. If you think of the ones that make noise, or verbose or whatever.
Yeah.
So why? Well, I mean, I guess this one has sound stuff in it, but like for alternatives for anyway. Like,
oh yeah.
Is the open source a big factor in your decision?
I do. I do tend to take that into account. Yeah. I don't think I've bought anything from like a huge vendor in a long, long time.
I guess you have to always make it so flexible, right? Because everyone's systems are different. But if people lock it all down, it would be impossible to have a community.
Yeah. Well, same with this, right on the back, open source hardware.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool.
Oh yeah, Plinky. They have the fellow that developed this has a web-based editor to edit patches, and also I was talking about the wavetable for some of the waveforms. He's working on a web-based wavetable editor as well. And similarly with this, the latest version of its firmware, there's a web-based editor, so you can set up what MIDI values this is sending out. And I was talking about the I2C protocol. Leader and follower are important concepts. So typically, by default, this is a leader. but I want to use this along with the Teletype and the ER301. It's got to be a follower. So it's easy to set that instead of programming it and reading it.
Well, thanks, Ernie. Any other last questions before we?
I just had a quick
Oh, do
Yes,
yeah.
please.
Just yeah. So this is, you mentioned all digital. Do you work a lot with analog as well, or did you start there?
I started with kind of hybrid stuff. The first oscillators I made were the company was the Harvest Man, which is now Industrial Music Electronics, and I bought his oscillator called the Hertz Donut, which is it's a complex, it's a version of a complex oscillator, like the two oscillators, one modulating here, but it's actually a digital oscillator. But I bought his filter as well, the Bionic Lester, and that's analog. And then I bought another module to control them all that most of you may or may not have heard of, called MATS, which is a nice dual function generator, envelope generator.
So it's a mix of both. I told him I accidentally said analog synth, and he sent me a message being like, "No, I do."
I don't like, you know, there's, goodness knows there's like still a lot of analog synthesizer stuff out there, especially in the modular world, depending on the vendors you're looking at. But I didn't want to mislead anybody because there's really nothing analog in the signal chain. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Should we give people a few minutes just to stand up and, if you need to use the washroom, maybe grab a glass of water, and then we'll switch over and Helen and WL will share some work with you, and hopefully you can come back tonight and see Ernie playing with all of this, performing with all of this.
So, hi everybody. My name is Helen. This is WL, somewhere over here. And we've worked together for quite a long time as the duo called SBot N Wo. And that's an acronym which we can explain to you if you want to know. It's sort of a joke. But really what I do as the duo is almost, I would describe it as almost the complete opposite of what Ernie does, because I use my voice, which I proudly call the original instrument, as the great American singer Joan LaBarbera said. And I try to use the technology of the voice and the body. So I don't do all the fancy stuff that Ernie does. I'm just a singer. And just to give you a brief story about me, not to go on and on about it, but I started as a classical singer and studied classical music. And while I still love that, I began to get tired with the limitations of that music and the limitations and expectations of what a classical voice is supposed to sound like. There's a very strict sense of that, which is very beautiful. I want to add that I don't have anything against that. It's just I started to get tired of it for myself and wanted to explore other things that the voice can do. Are there people here that sing? Singers? Excellent. Are there people here that think they do not sing? Good. Because my response to that is actually everybody can sing, everybody can use their voice. And that's part of my exploration, I would say, is discovering what those things are. And again, stepping out of some kind of box of expectations about what a voice does. So that is kind of where we come from, because as a duo, I use my voice, which WL then expands, mostly with this program called Ableton Live, which he will describe to you. But I thought I'd start off by talking about some of the things I've explored. And I don't know if you're willing, but we could try some of them together if you feel like it. Just to get us going, and feel free to not join in if you don't want to. If you don't want to join in, feel free to just sit and relax and listen. And yeah, and I don't even need to do something right now. But if you would like to, I would invite you to stand. Yeah, don't feel you have to. And because we're trying to keep our social distance, we won't do how I usually start this, which is walking around. But if there's a way you can, maybe you two can turn around so you can see the other people. And we're just going to sort of just try and make eye contact with each other. First of all, you can look around the room at each other. It's easier when we're walking, but we won't do that today. If you can catch eyes with somebody, just say hello when you catch their eye.
Oh.
Yeah. Hello.
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 Hi.
Hello.
Great. And just keep trying that. Just keep doing that. And now, as we go along and you get more comfortable with this odd exercise, you can change, instead of just saying hello or hi, just make a sound as you interact with each other. So like, yeah. Beep. That was a very, see, right away, we've made a really kind of interesting soundscape just with kind of being silly and making sounds at each other. Wonderful. Okay, great. Now let me think how we can do this next. I'm trying to adapt my exercises to social distancing. Let me see. Let's try, I'm going to start this one. And it's just the same thing. We're just going to make sounds, but we're going to exchange sounds. So as I don't get too close and you don't have to get too close to anybody, I'm going to pick on Rebecca as my first partner. I'm going to make a sound, and then I'm going to point to her, and then we'll make a sound together, so we make a little duet. Then I'm going to drop out. Then Rebecca will make a little sound, and then she will point to somebody else and duet. Do you get it? So it's like solos, duos. You may have done this exercise before. It's a nice way to get going. So when it's your turn to make the sound, try not to feel awkward about it, because it can be any sound you want, because you're just using your body. So you can think about what sound you like to make with your voice. I guess that's the only restriction. Use your voice. So I try not to just think, oh, I'll just clap my hands. Let's use our technological cue and instruments. So here we go. I'm just going to start with something. Abadi, abadu, abadi, abadu, abadi, abadu, labadi, badidi, badala, labadi, abadi, labada, Nice, you guys. Great, good job, everyone. It's just fun, and you can go on, of course, with that. Sometimes then you can get 2 streams going, so then you can have some trios and some duos. And it just can introduce you, or get you started with thinking about different ways of using your voice, instead of just singing. Singing a tune. And again, I keep feeling like I have to qualify that. There's nothing wrong with just singing tunes. Singing tunes is great. But there's other stuff we can do. So, just quickly, some of the things I've been exploring, which, perhaps you can try as well. I mean, some of the very obvious things that we sort of generally call extended techniques. Some of them are very obvious, like whispering. Whispering can be very effective in a piece, right? Or using a bigger shouting kind of voice, right? And trying to find a different quality in your voice from what you normally use. You can sing on the in-breath, which is also kind of a cool thing to do, right? Normally, when you sing, you take a nice breath in, la, but you can also go, la, 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 and it makes a slightly different quality to your voice, which is kind of interesting. To use. And then, if you're a singer, you may know the term vocal fry. Do you guys know that term? So, it's been quite a lot has been written about it in recent years because, it has become sort of a trend, in the way people speak, right? When you end your sentence like that. And that's actually a vocal fry. Famously, Naomi Wolf wrote an article about it, which said that young women, especially, are prone to using the vocal fry when they talk, and they should liberate themselves from that because it makes them sound less intelligent. And then there was a great outcry and controversy about that. Like, well, what do you mean? Women should speak any way they want to. If they want to use vocal fry, let them go ahead. Men also use vocal fry. I had a student at the University of Regina who talked like that but he was like a bass singer. He just talked like that all the time. And I tried to tell him, like, you should, change, sometimes use your voice in a different way. You'll get tired. But anyway. But vocal fry is also an exercise sometimes singers use because it can be very relaxing. It's making your actual vocal instrument in here, move very easily. So just like, sometimes singing teachers use that as an exercise just to let the vocal folds relax. You can play with that vocal fry sound and find, it's sort of like, I was going to talk about overtones in a minute. This is kind of like the undertone. So you can find a sound underneath your sound. So let's say I was singing this pitch, and then if I relax my throat a little bit, you get a sound underneath it, which sounds like a bit like static, but sometimes you can pick out a little pitch as well. And so, hey, if you feel like trying that, it's hard to do it all together, but we could try. Then you can't really tell if you're making a sound or not. But let's just really quickly try that. So just choose any pitch you want, and just see if you can feel your throat relax, and see if you can find that little bit of static underneath it. See, that's it. I find that actually quite beautiful. I hear you all doing that together. Yeah. So that would be something, if you like, you can experiment with, and I've been playing with that. And then, like I said, I feel like the opposite is the overtone. As you know, sounds are made up of, a collection of sound waves. And, when you sing, you're producing those with the cavities in your mouth and your body. But you can work on, it's sort of, in my mind, this is very unscientific and again sort of opposite of what Ernie was talking about, because this is really just my imaginative way of thinking of it in my voice. It's like I pick out certain parts of those partials and I focus on those. So, you sing a low note and you pick out a high note that's part of it. You can hear that. And of course you've heard that before, and it's part of the folk music tradition of various peoples who can do it with amazing control and sing like two melodies at the same time. You probably heard that, which is so cool. So I won't invite you to try that together because it's really hard to hear when you're doing it all together. But experiment with that. There are a couple of ways to do it. One of them is to get the sound like it's really in your nose. Like I think I'm really focusing on an R sound, and I feel it buzzing in my nose. And then just see if you can find it. And then, of course, take yourself to a lovely resonant church where you can hear it super clearly. So, in a really quick nutshell, those are a few of the things that I like to play with my voice. Interestingly, when I use them in a performance, sometimes people come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh my gosh, you must be destroying your voice. Like that sounds so hard on your voice. It's so difficult to do." And the only response I can give is, well, I've been doing it for a long time and I can still sing. So, it's like any kind of singing. If you choose to sing in a choir or sing classical music or opera, you want to learn about, how to support the sound with your breath, like all those typical standard physical things, because it's a physical instrument. And it's the same for extended techniques and improvising, as for any other kind of singing. And then, that leads me to bring in WL, because what we do is improvise together, and he bases his work with Ableton purely and simply on the sounds I make. So I get to play around with these extended techniques. Sometimes I use standard singing, and then we sort of weave that together into an improvised soundscape. So maybe I'll let WL talk about his process for a bit.
Sure. I mean, it's kind of our process, but we, including Ernie, we all come basically at the same. To me, I can hear sort of some overriding conceptual congruences, let's say. They just alliterate the heck out of the place. But when I was listening to Helen talk about it, like it's in a sense, it's like we have conventions, and classical technique on any instrument is a convention. It's a beautiful. It's something people, that those disciplines have been working on for centuries. And this is like right now, like you go to the conservatory and you learn how to make that perfect sound on a trombone, so you can play a Verdi Requiem or something like that. And it will obviously... Sorry,
I forgot to say this at the beginning. We are going to go a little over time because we started a bit late, so if you have to go...
Yeah, no problem.
Don't worry.
No problem.
Yeah.
And we won't. I don't think we need to go much over time because it's been so rich, what you guys have already said, that I just sort of want to put my 2 cents in. That's about it. And then obviously I will see what that generates in terms of conversation. But so, I mean, I think in terms of what Helen's talking about breaking convention, it seems like a really sort of radical, nasty 20th century art thing. But we did, if Bach was working with conventions and he was messing them up and making them Bach, right? Yeah. That's my sort of, I don't know, personal opinion, basically, or interpretation. Yeah. And then when people talk about extended techniques, for instance, this is my old shtick. Whereas, I mean, like, if you listen to the Queen of the Night aria, that is not a natural thing to do. It's a very, very weird thing to do with your voice. And it is extended technique. And, so we've been working at, the convention is sort of like what keeps us on common ground, like genre and style and all that sort of thing. And all the theory we learn, in music school and that sort of thing. But then we're like as performers and creators, it's sort of like the unspoken rule that you learn to play exactly what Brahms intended and nothing more, and then you learn what interpretation is, and it is like anyway. Those of you who are in line with me, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And every like really good classical teacher always like you work on learning those conventions so well up to a certain point, and then now we make it you. It's going to be you. Right. So I mean, in general, I think there are probably still really pedantic people who say, well, you have to understand what Beethoven wanted, and that's the only thing that you can do. So it was mentioned I use Ableton, and basically when I use Ableton, everything's set out there for me, right? So it is really like the flip side of what Ernie's doing, but But, you know, the people in Berlin who put this thing together, they understand about voltage controlling, they understand about, you know, an oscillator, and then going through a filter, and all these processes which Ernie is working at, and those are those conventions that he's messing up, right? He's like doing his own thing to, and crushing those oscillators together to create, or various wave forms and tables and so on, to do something like one thing informs the next and informs the next. So another thing, and since this is basically an improv thing, and not just tech, to me, the idea as a composer. So I come to this as a composer, and so as an improviser, you know, often people talk about improv being real-time composition, and I think in a sense that's what I do. I have a certain instrument, and I would, again, as an analogy, I don't know why, that's the way I think. I mean, I can imagine it being like a symphony orchestra, where I have this opportunity to go like stick something in the trombone, turn him around backwards, and even take a slide off, those sorts of things. And so Ableton has all this stuff in it. And of course, the more you understand the principles, and I've sort of gone through the back door. I got Ableton back in the early aughts, and it was like Ableton version 2 or something like that. And Ableton has always had, this is like a commercial now, Ableton has always had a free demo that's totally operational, completely operational. Only recently they've offered one where it's 30 days and now 90 days where you get to save and export. In my day, that was the limitation, you couldn't save and export. So I learned to be a real-time musician with Ableton. I never bought Ableton until, I worked with it for performing for 10 years before I bought it. So it really informed what I did, and also it made me do the absolute opposite of what it's meant to do. So I've come now that's my spiel. That Ableton is as much a convention as you can ever come across. It's a commercial software that's designed to fulfill the needs of people doing a very specific genre of music, really. And I've never done a beat, I don't quantize. And so, that's basically it. I just take Helen's sound, whatever it might be, trap it, and do something with it. And there are a limited number of things you can do, and they're quite related to what Ernie's doing. I can make a loop, but loops get very tedious after a while. So it's like fighting against the conventions. I mean, I could say fighting against this square machine, but you're always trying to push something against something else in order. And the other thing is, so this is a completely other sort of angle on an approach to improvisation and performance, and that is working with really like restrictions and trying to work your way out of those, or try to make something out of those limitations and build one on the other. And that's something that's common in all visual arts as well. Where in performance, where you limit yourself to one gesture or something. What can I do with this one gesture? What can I do with time, or the concept of time, etc. So basically, let's just do a little something, and maybe I'll do a little teeny play-by-play. I'm going longer. No, I'm not. Yeah. I'm talking fast. Sorry.
It's hard enough, Mask. Yeah. We'll do a super short demo. And then, if people have questions, they can ask them, obviously.
And maybe, if you don't mind it, Helen, maybe as opposed to a performance-studded demo, we'll just get a bit of sound going, and then just show you a couple things. I don't know.
Sure. Okay. So, I don't know. Out of the blue, I will just make a sound.
Yeah, and often, in art, we also, in terms of a sort of like a limit, it's not so much a limitation; it's a struggle. Where, like, Helen has this microphone, and I have control over the microphone. But she also has the control of making her voice be in the room.
Right.
So, she might want to do something really quiet into the microphone. I've got it turned down and got a whole bunch of effects on it and stuff. So we just, like, that's the outcome, right?
Yeah.
And so there's got to be indeterminacy to make it real, right? That's what the world is indeterminate. So.
And then, as hopefully we'll do tonight successfully, we simply listen to what's happening and kind of riff from there, and make something out of that. Sometimes we have a shape, like we'll say, okay, we're going to focus on X, and then we try and make X work. But quite often it's just simply freeform. So this is, I'll just make a short sound when WL is ready, and we then will sort of go through what happens after I've done that. Are you ready? X, and then we try and make X work. But quite often it's just simply freeform. So this is, I'll just make a short sound when WL is ready, and he then will sort of go through, make a short
So one
sound
thing
when WL is ready.
I could be doing is just make
sort of go through,
make a loop. And so it could be a rhythmic loop like that. And this is like the simplest level of all, you know, I got, so for instance, I could make this, I've got two versions of this loop going, and I could just make one like a tiny bit shorter than the other one. And then I've got, and then of course, transpose it a little bit. So yeah, of course, we get a rhythm going, and we can do this deep right thing forever.
And then maybe I do something on
Yeah, of course. So I mean,
yeah,
so
people
yeah,
know
okay. So I've kind of trapped myself. I'm stuck in this loop, and I've got and beautiful, because that leads me to like another limitation that I intentionally. I have this conversation with people who work in different ways with lots of controllers and that sort of thing. I use an index finger, and I can only do one thing at a time. So what that ends up doing is that I have to, which I really didn't do there. I have to get something that has some momentum and change in it, so that I can move over and change something else while that is doing its thing. And that's something like over, 12 years that we've been doing this. That long, yeah, at least. I've built up my techniques for doing those sorts of things, right?
Well, once WL said to a friend, "My arm is really tired from mousing." But her friend thought he meant he'd been like chasing, tracking mice in the mouse or something.
Yeah. Really, actually, one of my most gratifying shows was when someone came up after me and said, like, "I cannot believe what you do with that mouse." Right on. I mean, basically, I could go in various directions, but I think you get the concept, and the concept is all you need. The rest is you, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, the idea of, like, the possibilities of infinite combinations to things, but then also knowing within your instrument, the subtleties, the subtle changes that can make the right kind of difference. Always playing with that, sort of riding it. And she's doing the same thing with her voice. She's really quite I like this maybe the second time I heard. No, I didn't. She's kind of obstinate, let's put it that way, about just being a voice. And all us tech nerds, like, how come why don't you get a little pedal or something? But no, she'll do a whole concert, voice alone, and that's been her thing for a decade as well, or more. And but she's playing those same games with sometimes over the top weirdos. And weirdo is just a word that means the opposite of the convention, right?
But that's, and that is sort of, that has kind of become my shtick, is that I am my own computer or something, I don't know.
Yeah. Great.
So that's a very, brief kind of demo and talk about what we do, and if folks have questions, please feel free to ask, or comments, of course.
I have a question from a very, vocal point of view, which
Sure.
is so you're mentioning that you've worked in a different kind of realm to classical, let's say, voice.
Yeah.
When you are doing your warm-ups, are they still kind of in a, the same warm-ups as a classical singer might do, or are they different somehow?
That's a very interesting question, because I've been sort of exploring that. Generally, when I start to warm up my voice, I use classical warm-ups, because that is what I know from, whenever I started taking voice lessons as a kid, and I know it's going to get my, my breath going and remind me how to support and all those important things. But I do sometimes try to add more specific exercises. Sorry, I realize my watch is flashing around. I hope I'm not catching you in the eye with it. So, for example, and this is a super singer nerd thing to say, but sometimes I do exercises in the passaggio. The passaggio is a certain place in a singer's voice where it's like you're changing registers. And for most singers, you have to think about the typical classical training is to think about smoothing that out so that nobody hears the difference in sound. Clarinets have a really big passaggio as well, if anyone plays the clarinet. I mean, a lot of instruments do. But anyway, for a singer, we're traditionally supposed to smooth it out. And I sometimes experiment with purposely not smoothing it out and making the bump happen, because then that's sort of an interesting vocal sound in itself. And I also try to sometimes warm up on overtones and whistle tones. Whistle tones are those super, super high notes that you can get. And usually I can only find them reliably when my voice is tired, which seems wrong. But then I try to, yeah. So short answer to your question, I start with classical stuff and then I sometimes do some experimental stuff as well, just to try things out. Yeah. Other thoughts?
Well, I was going to ask about, like, because I've done work like that with Ellen Waterman and essentially creating one instrument with two people, and it's do you feel like you could do it with somebody else? Because there's an element of trust where you're, especially for the instrumentalist or the singer, you're just basically handing over your sounds to somebody else who can do whatever he wants with it. And, obviously you need to be okay with that, but it's a fascinating kind of, it's not really a meta instrument, it's creating a duo with one instrument.
Yeah. Well, I actually did recently do a duo performance with somebody else a couple of weeks ago in Winnipeg. Not with Ableton. He just had it actually with Jimmy.
Okay.
Yeah, a mutual friend of ours. And he just had an array of pedals. But it was in a way similar. Like, I had my microphone, I made sounds, and then Jim played with them with his pedals. And it worked pretty well, but your point is true. I mean, Jimmy's a really good friend, so I had great trust that he would do something super cool with it. Whether I could do that with a complete stranger, I don't know. Yeah, that'd be interesting to try. I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, that's definitely a real consideration. It's interesting using the Jimmy example because he's like somewhere triangularly related to what we're doing because he's using pedals that are built by major companies like Boss and so on. Although he has some specialized pedals too, but definitely that sort of trust. I mean, free improv, you're sort of make a meta instrument anyway, and so very often it comes down to, like, you might feel like this was a disaster, depending on some people don't believe there's such a thing as a disaster, and that's cool too, but audiences, I think.
Feedback that blows up the sound system.
Yeah, when you can't hear anything but one person, when your sound gets obliterated by the other person, that's often considered a disaster by the people who get obliterated. But so it's always this kind of trusting. But there's a real intimacy, definitely a real intimacy that gets developed. Also, expectations of like any band, any ensemble that does interactive stuff.
Yeah.
You know what to expect, where something's going, and sometimes not that again.
Yeah, actually, that's a good way of describing it. It's like being in a band. I mean, Jim will remember Motion Ensemble. This was a new music ensemble that I sang with for many years, based in New Brunswick, and we did a lot of concerts and touring together, and we really functioned as a unit because we got to know each other so well that we knew, like. And this was mostly using like actual scored music written by composers. It wasn't improvising so much, but we got to know each other well enough that, we could say, oops, Nadia missed that entrance. That's okay. I know where she is. I'm going to, not to pick on Nadia because she's actually a musician who would never ever make a mistake in her life. She's like the perfect musician, but that, that vibe that you get where you know each other, you know what's happening. and you can trust each other.
Trust
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, that's really cool. I was just going to mention, because we talked about classical music, that sort of thing, like Helen talking about how she came to it. Of course, we've been together for a long time, so I've observed that process. And because we studied in the conservatory, we studied classical, I studied classical composition and singing, frankly, and so did Helen. It's also the influences that you just end up navigating. And so, like, early on, she started singing Webern, that's breaking conventions of what notes of any instrument should be playing, and what size of intervals and degree of change of dynamics, and etc. And so you go from that, where you're breaking the convention of harmony, and then go and rhythm and ensemble, but then she does Barrio Sequenza, where language gets messed around, and how vocal production is made is messed around, and then the conceptual sort of approaches of Kate. So those are all influences that if we wouldn't have dreamt we'd be here necessarily. I mean, for me, Ives, Webern, and then.
Oh, when I was 19, I wanted to be an opera singer, and.
So anyway, any more questions? Otherwise, it's been fun.
There's a
Great.
couple of other singers. I don't know. I feel like I'm interested in the relationship between singing songs and breaking them down.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can talk a bit more about that.
Well, I guess another thing that I didn't really talk about is another advantage I feel singers have, which is that we always have text, right? And first of all, as a student of voice, which I guess I still am, we have the pleasure of reading all kinds of wonderful poetry. Sometimes schlocky poetry, but sometimes great poetry, which has been a lovely sideline to my work as a singer. But I'm not sure if this is exactly what you were getting at, Rebecca, but the idea of using text as well. In classical training, we want to be very expressive with the text and paint the picture. And then with improvisation and the contemporary work, you can also play with the breakdown of the text. And in the very famous piece by Barrio Sequenza, that's what he does. He takes, syllables and phonemes or even just individual sounds. And that can be something you can also improvise with and play with. Now I've forgotten what your initial question was.
Oh,
Rebecca,
just about the relationship of a kind of song as an object, and then the breaking down of it that you do with when you start improvising off each other.
Right.
I was interested in how you kind of keep holding on to bits of the object. I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I think, sorry, I'm hogging the conversation here. Often in the back of my mind when I'm improvising, I do have a bit of a shape. And songs always have shapes, just like, a symphony has a shape, or a rock song has a shape. So I do have that quite often in the back of my mind. Like I found this sound that I kind of liked. WL played with it. Let's see if we can bring that back, which is a sort of, very, very traditional classical thing, like you come back home, come back to the home key or come back to the main theme or something. So that is a vestige, I would say, of song. And maybe you want to talk about what.
No, that's beautiful. I mean, we all can sort of just extrapolate from there. But I think of like good old bebop, and how you have a head, and then even the head. Eventually as things get more interesting, or different artists might play that thematic part, like even in their own style. But then then you break it down. That's find its kernels and expand those and play them against each other. That's the composer in me. Immediately, as soon as there's material, like how does it relate to it? How could one be contrast or complement? And so that's kind of like, there's definitely a school of improvisation where that is no, like that's too imposing form and stuff like that, and don't do that. That's fun too. Fun too. But we tend to have our instincts where we still, as musicians ourselves, we do tend to take those vestiges, as she calls them, and use those as structural underpinnings, basically, of what we're doing. Yeah. And however imperceptible that might be too, that's kind of fun too, where the structure is not is not audible or perceivable.
Yeah, actually, that just reminds me, that's another thing I sometimes do, which is fun for me. It's kind of an in-joke for myself, but I'll take a word that I haven't told anyone about and just use the sounds or syllables from it, and I'll use those through the piece. And then for me, it's kind of fun, like, hey, I just said the whole name, James Harley, and nobody knew that I was saying, And then for me, that becomes a funny little structure. But it's like if you're if you studied the history of music, it's like those hidden things that composers used to put in their mass settings. Like they used a popular tune to write the Kyrie song, and or it's an isorhythm where it's like there's some secret message hidden in the music. Anyway, all that stuff.
Yeah, and bebop soloists do the same thing, although really overtly sometimes. Like, take me out of the ball game in the middle of some. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in you mentioned motion music or something like that.
Oh yeah, it was called Motion Ensemble.
Are there other vocal ensembles or even vocal and electronics ensembles that are kind of happening right now that you would be able to share?
Well, there are some other really great vocalists that do experimental music. And I think probably like me, Motion Ensemble was really special because it was kind of a set group, and we commissioned work that we always did together as a group. I think more often, maybe even now, too, people work individually and sort of form a group and do a show and then work with other people and do a show. But some other great vocalists that would do similar work would be Christine Duncan in Toronto and Sarah Albu, who is based in Montreal, I think. Yeah. And Kathy Kennedy. Yeah.
Not so much in the context of a band, though, like motion ensemble, like where a vocalist is part of kind of a chambered group, or that's pretty unusual, isn't it?
It was kind of a unique thing, and part of the fun for me of being part of motion ensemble was that I was sometimes, the singer like gets to sing the text and like spotlight on me, yada yada yada, but also I was often just one of the instruments. And I got to blend with the instruments and not be the diva, which was very satisfying to me because I often, singers and musicians have sort of different descriptions in people's minds, and I often think I'm more a musician than a singer, so if that makes sense, yeah.
Sorry, I meant more so also like for me to join a group, like a community or something like that, like an ensemble doing that. But I guess you're saying that there aren't that many.
Well, Christine has some stuff going in Toronto.
Yeah, Christine Duncan.
Yeah, Christine Duncan.
She's coming here in 2 weeks.
Oh, really? Oh, awesome. Great.
Yeah,
check her out. Yeah.
The Guelph Jazz Festival.
Okay, super.
But there are also, in light of talking about that, like a chamber group, which normally doesn't have a singer as an instrument in a chamber group, that you could think of it that way. Like there are also improv groups where I bet they'd be only too happy to have a vocalist, and that'd be in a sense more challenging. You don't have a director saying like, go or something.
Yeah.
You do it.
You explore for yourself.
So that could be an interesting approach too. And again, I don't want to name, and in fact, I'm not from this area, but I mean, I know that the Woodchoppers Orchestra, for instance. But I mean, they're just like, there are groups that friends.
Right.
If you know some good musicians who are into improv, then the sky's the limit.
Well, Guelph is very rich for cultural and musical and arts activities, so there may be an improv collective going. That you could join and just jump in with both feet and see what happens. Yeah. Does anyone know? Is there a goal?
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
I'm going to give Anna. Anna needs to run.
Okay.
You wrote a master's thesis on the topic as well.
I interviewed Christine for my perfect. Among others.
There you go. There's your source. Great. Any other comments or thoughts or concerns? Well, we all have concerns these days.
I'm curious, as you moved from classical, and either one of you could answer this, and as you moved from classical to this more experimental, or how did your conceptions of your jobs change? what a singer, what a composer.
Well, I mean, you're out of certain, traditional organizations, let's say. I mean, obviously, symphony. I did have a traditional education as a composer, and there is a world of commissions for orchestras and chamber groups, and I've been fortunate enough to have direct relationships with certain chamber groups, particularly the one that my wife sang with, so that's my best answer from my perspective, is you're more dependent on connections, on building language in a sense, like common values in what you're doing, because you're making them up. You're making them up, and they're not the same as someone who plays in a section in an orchestra. In fact, they're the sorts of things that make people in a section in an orchestra start looking at their what. I had that experience as a composer, quite honestly. I had a few of them, but yeah. But speaking of conventions, like some people are very comfortable with conventions. So anyway, it's sounding like I'm dissing symphonic musicians, and it's just one side of the story. Of course, they're so beautifully devoted to that certain. So, am I answering the question? Yeah. I think it's like building your own community. Very often from the opposite direction, when students ask me, like, for advice, my best advice is, like, make good friends with good musicians, I think that's the best thing you can do. And that's what happened, So, I will, one little, because, it seems a little gross as her spouse, but like, when she sings with a chamber group, it's always like, wow, you're a singer? Like, that's not what so she was subtly talking about those sorts of stereotypes, which are quite well-founded, of like singers who need a pianist, expect a pianist, and the pianist expects that the singer will need, to go bing, 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 that's your note, ding, 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 that sort of thing. But she just gets in there and does very complex music with other people, with instrumentalists who aren't accustomed to singers keeping up.
That would be my answer to the question, is that I feel that I've stepped out of those conventional boxes or costumes that classical singers wear. The image, the beautiful woman with the perfect hair and the lovely dresses. I'm sorry, this is terribly stereotyped, but you all know what I'm talking about. Who expects to be the star and needs help learning her music because she, hasn't got right. Yeah, and again, I know those are horrible stereotypes, but stereotypes come from somewhere. And I think that's what I learned, is that I don't have to be that. I'm not that. I never was that, and I never want to be that. I want to be something else. And as a very small side note, I've just recently given up university teaching. I took early retirement, and in retrospect, looking back at my career as a university professor, I think I was always kind of disappointing to my faculty because they would hire me and think, well, this is a very interesting person. She does new music. She can teach these different courses, and then I would come and do the kind of music that I do, and no one ever said this to me, but I always felt like the faculty was thinking, well, like, what is she doing? Like, what is this weird stuff? Like, doesn't she do a concert of, some Schubert or something that we, yeah. So, I think it's probably just as well that I'm not doing that anymore. By the way, I love Schubert. Okay. We've gone way over time. We've gone
plenty over time, but
thank you very much. Just sneak behind you. We did have some folks joining us online, which was great.
Good.
So I just wanted to say thanks to them for coming too. And also, for all of you, multiPLAY is a project that is trying to kind of connect improvisers across Canada. So you can check out multiplay.ca and stay in touch. And again, we're trying to find ways to build those communities that we've talked about, where we can find each other and connect and share techniques and ideas, connected by a sense that improvisation can do more than just be a technique. It can be an enabler of relationship and an enabler of being together in a time where we haven't been able to be together lots of ways. We've been using digital technologies to try and cross those boundaries a little bit. So we continue to work on multiPLAY for another 6 months. We'll be back in Guelph for our final events for the multiPLAY project, so you'll get to see all the artists, not the ones that just came this time. So everyone will be here, and James Harley is one of the artists on the project as well, so, and John Campbell is also one of the artists. So there'll be lots of things to see then. But I just wanted to say, please stay connected to the multiPLAY project, and we'll try and keep sharing the recordings and live streams and everything, so that if you want to watch things again, and if you want to get in touch with any of the artists, please contact me or the multiPLAY email address that you've registered on, because we'd love to build more relationships between all of you fantastic people who are fascinated by sound. And I wanted to say thank you to Scarlett Richardson at Silence. Thank you so much. And, John's sitting over here magically live streaming this in 360 Interactive to the world without, saying much, but thank you so much for doing that as well. And we'll be back tonight for the concert at 7 o'clock, so I really hope you can all make it. And thanks for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.